The flashbang hits the floor and the room disappears. Not slowly, not in stages. It is instant. Light so violent it feels solid, like it has weight. Sound that slams into the skull before the mind has time to process it. For most people, that moment fractures time. Before and after, noise replaces thought. White replaces shape. Balance leaves the body without asking permission. That is the split second everything is supposed to stop. Eyes clamp shut on instinct, even though it does not help. Ears ring with a high, thin scream that makes it hard to tell if the sound is inside the head or in the room. Muscles tense, waiting for instructions that never arrive. Training manuals describe it as disorientation, but that word is too gentle. It is panic stripped down to its most basic form. A body that suddenly does not trust the world around it. The flashbang is designed for that exact purpose. Not to injure, not to kill, just to steal time. A few seconds where nobody can think clearly. A few seconds where resistance collapses into confusion. In close quarters, a few seconds is everything. The operators who threw it are already moving. Boots cross the threshold. Weapons come up. Voices shout commands that blur together in the ringing haze. They expect frozen figures. Hands in the air. Staggering bodies trying to blink the world back into focus. They expect dominance because that is what the device usually delivers. Inside the room, the air smells like dust and burned chemicals. Furniture rattles from the concussion. Something small tips over and skids across the floor. These details do not register for most people. The brain is too busy trying to reassemble itself. Vision pulses uselessly, alternating between white and black. Depth disappears. Direction loses meaning. But in that same split second, something else happens. Not panic, not confusion, a narrowing. Instead of the world exploding outward, it collapses inward. Sound becomes information rather than noise. The echo of boots on tile. The scrape of gear against a doorway. The direction of breath that does not belong to the room. The subtle shift in air pressure as bodies enter the space. These are not conscious thoughts. There is no time for that. They surface the way balance does when you trip, automatic and immediate. Her eyes are useless now. She knows that without checking. She does not try to force them open. There is no blinking, no shaking of the head, no instinctive reach for vision. The flashbang took sight, but sight was never the foundation. It was only one input among many, and not the most reliable one in close quarters. The body moves before the brain names the movement. Weight shifts. Knees bend slightly. The floor tells her where she is standing. The room tells her its size. The sound tells her how many people just crossed into it. Distance is measured in steps, not in meters. Angles are measured in echoes and airflow. The ringing in her ears is there, but it does not dominate. It is pushed aside, the way pain is pushed aside when something more urgent takes control. For the people entering the room, the flashbang is still doing its job. They believe they own these seconds. They believe no one can act inside this chaos. They believe the rules of the environment favor them completely. That belief is quiet, but it shapes every movement they make. It makes them fractionally slower. It makes them expect compliance instead of resistance. The flashbang's light fades quickly, but the assumption lingers longer. That assumption is the real weapon. That assumption is what creates the opening. In this split second, there is no fear. Fear requires anticipation, and there is no room for anticipation here. There is only action rooted in repetition. Movements practiced so often they exist below thought. Responses layered on top of stress until stress becomes the trigger rather than the obstacle. The body recognizes the conditions and selects the answer without consulting doubt or hesitation. Somewhere outside the room, the plan is unfolding exactly as intended. The entry was clean. The device detonated. Control should follow. Inside the room, however, control is already slipping, not because the flashbang failed, but because it worked on the wrong person, in the wrong way, at the wrong time. Elite training is often described as extreme, but that word misses the point. It is not about how hard it looks from the outside. It is about what remains when everything else is stripped away. When comfort, clarity, and choice are removed, training decides what happens next. Not motivation, not courage. Training. Under pressure, The human brain looks for shortcuts. It reaches for the most familiar pattern and clings to it. In untrained people, those patterns are shallow. They depend on calm conditions and clear inputs. When chaos arrives, the system overloads. Too much information, too little structure. Decision-making slows, then collapses. Elite training is built to survive that collapse. The goal is not to make someone fearless. Fear still shows up. Heart rate spikes. Adrenaline floods the system. Hands tremble. What changes is the relationship to those sensations. They stop being signals to panic and become background noise. The body learns that these feelings do not mean failure. They mean the environment has shifted. That learning is not theoretical. It is burned in through repetition under stress. Movements are practiced until they no longer require permission from conscious thought. Drills are run when people are exhausted, soaked, hungry, and angry. Mistakes are allowed early, then punished later, not with cruelty, but with consequence. The lesson is simple. If you cannot perform when conditions are bad, you do not perform at all. This is why elite training looks monotonous from the outside. The same motions over and over. The same entries. The same clears. The same transitions. Variety is introduced slowly and deliberately, never at the expense of fundamentals. Complexity is layered only after simplicity is unshakable. What that creates is not rigid behavior, but reliable behavior. When pressure spikes, the mind does not search for a creative solution. It falls back to what has survived the most stress. That fallback is not a guess. It is a tested response. Under extreme pressure, conscious decision-making becomes a liability. The brain is too slow, too easily distracted. Elite training accounts for that. It moves decisions earlier in time, embedding them into preparation rather than execution. By the time action is required, the decision has already been made 1,000 times before. This is why elite operators often appear calm in moments that paralyze others. Calm is not a personality trait. It is a byproduct. When the mind recognizes a familiar problem, even in an unfamiliar environment, it does not panic. It categorizes. It labels. It moves. Training also redefines what information matters. In chaos, most data is useless. Noise, motion, and visual clutter overwhelm perception. Elite training teaches what to ignore as much as what to notice. Attention narrows. The irrelevant fades. What remains is actionable. That selectivity is intentional. It is built through scenarios where sensory input is deliberately degraded. Low light, loud noise, physical contact, confined spaces. The body learns to operate without perfect information. It learns that waiting for clarity is a mistake. Another misconception about elite training is that it produces uniform reactions. In reality, it produces adaptability within structure. The fundamentals do not change, but how they are applied does. That flexibility comes from understanding principles rather than memorizing scripts. The operator is not following steps. They are solving a problem within known constraints. Most importantly, elite training creates trust. Trust in teammates, trust in systems, and trust in one's own body. That trust removes hesitation. When you believe the person next to you will do their job, you do not waste time checking on them. When you believe your body will respond correctly, you do not second-guess it. In moments of extreme pressure, hesitation is more dangerous than aggression. Elite training does not eliminate risk, but it reduces uncertainty. It replaces hope with probability. It narrows the gap between stimulus and response until action feels inevitable. What looks like instinct from the outside is really memory. Deep, reinforced memory that does not rely on sight, sound, or comfort. Memory that survives chaos. Memory that activates when everything else shuts down. When sight disappears, most people freeze because they were taught to trust their eyes above everything else. Vision dominates how humans understand space, distance, and threat. Remove it, and the brain suddenly feels cut off from reality. The world becomes abstract. Movement feels dangerous. Action feels risky. So people wait. Elite operators are trained to expect that moment, not as a possibility, but as an eventuality. Darkness, smoke, debris, blood, injury. Sight is treated as a convenience. not a requirement. From the beginning, training reinforces the idea that vision lies. It can be fooled by shadows, angles, and stress. Other senses are harder to deceive at close range. Sound becomes the primary map. Not loud sound, but specific sound. The direction of a footstep, the weight behind it. The difference between gear brushing against fabric and gear striking a wall. Breathing patterns reveal distance and readiness. A controlled breath sounds different from a panicked one. These distinctions are learned slowly, through exposure, not explanation. The environment itself speaks. Rooms have signatures. Hard floors reflect noise sharply. Soft surfaces absorb it. Corners create dead zones. Doorways funnel air. When someone moves through a space, they disturb it. Air pressure shifts. Temperature changes. These cues are subtle, but once recognized, they are impossible to ignore. Touch fills in the gaps vision leaves behind. The floor transmits vibration. Walls guide orientation. Furniture defines boundaries. A knee brushing a table leg says more about position than a glance ever could. Hands are not just tools, they are sensors. They read texture, resistance, movement. Even recoil becomes information rather than disruption. Balance is another anchor. The inner ear tracks motion independent of sight. Trained bodies learn to trust that system. Weight distribution, posture, and momentum tell the body when it is aligned and when it is exposed. This prevents overcorrection, the instinctive flailing that wastes energy and creates noise. Aiming without sight is not about guessing. It is about alignment. Weapon, body, and target form a relationship that does not require visual confirmation at close distances. Repetition builds that relationship until it becomes physical memory. The angle of the wrist, the tension in the shoulders, the placement of the feet. These elements lock together the same way they do when throwing a ball in the dark and still hitting your friend in the chest. Distance is measured through experience. Close-range encounters compress time and space. At that range, small adjustments matter more than precision. The goal is not perfection, but consistency. The body learns what works and discards what is not. This kind of capability is not taught through lectures. It is built in environments where sight is intentionally removed. Blindfolds, blacked-out rooms, smoke, strobe lights, stress layered on top of confusion. The purpose is not to simulate reality perfectly, but to break dependence on vision. Mistakes happen early and often. People miss targets. They lose orientation. They collide with objects. That failure is part of the process. Each mistake recalibrates the internal map. Over time, confidence shifts from the eyes to the body as a whole. Fear behaves differently in darkness. Without sight, the imagination fills in blanks. Training confronts that directly. Exposure teaches that most of what the mind invents is wrong. Sound clarifies. Touch confirms. Action reduces uncertainty. There is also a mental shift that happens. When vision is gone, the operator stops trying to control everything. Control is replaced by flow. Movement becomes smoother, less forced. Listening replaces scanning. Reacting replaces anticipating. For the opponent, this is deeply unsettling. They expect blindness to equal vulnerability. They expect hesitation. When resistance continues without sight, it breaks assumptions. It creates hesitation on the wrong side of the encounter. What looks impossible from the outside is simply the result of familiarity. Darkness becomes another condition, not a barrier. The body does not wait for permission to act. It recognizes the environment, adapts, and moves forward guided by sound, touch, balance, and memory. At first, nothing feels wrong to them. The entry was clean. The flashbang did what it was supposed to do. The room should belong to them now. That confidence is quiet but powerful. It shapes posture, pace, and expectation. They move forward assuming compliance or collapse, not resistance. Then something small breaks the pattern. A sound that should not be there. Movement that does not match the timeline. A body shifting with purpose instead of panic. It is subtle, easy to dismiss for half a second, but that half second matters. The brain hesitates, trying to reconcile what it expects with what it senses. This is where realization begins. Not as fear, but as confusion. They were trained to read rooms quickly. Frozen targets. Hands rising. Shouting. Scrambling. Instead, the space pushes back. Not wildly. Not loudly. Efficiently. The kind of resistance that feels deliberate. Measured. Familiar. Even if they cannot place why. The first clear sign is usually timing. Actions occur too fast for someone who should be disoriented. The window created by the flashbang is closing sooner than it should. Movements overlap instead of following. Initiative is contested when it should be uncontested. That is when assumptions start to crack. Someone reacts instead of recoiling. Someone moves toward sound rather than away from it. Someone does not chase clarity, but commits to action inside uncertainty. This is not what blindness looks like. This is not what panic sounds like. The moment stretches. Training collides with reality. Their minds run through options, but the environment is no longer cooperating. The flashbang was meant to simplify the problem. Instead, it complicated it. Now doubt enters. Doubt is dangerous because it slows decisions. It introduces questions that should not exist at this stage. Is the target trained? Is this room different than expected? Did the device fully function? Those questions cost fractions of a second, but in close quarters, fractions are everything. The realization deepens when resistance feels controlled. Not reactive, but anticipatory. Movements that cut angles instead of fleeing them. Positioning that denies space rather than giving it up. These are not random responses. They follow logic. At that point, the truth becomes unavoidable. They are not facing someone overwhelmed by the environment. They are facing someone operating comfortably within it. That understanding is unsettling because it flips the power dynamic. The flashbang was supposed to be the equalizer. It was supposed to create asymmetry. Instead, symmetry appears, or worse, inversion. The person without sight is still dangerous, maybe more so, because they are no longer distracted by visual chaos. Voices tighten. Commands sharpen. The tone shifts from control to urgency. The room feels smaller now. Walls that once felt like protection become constraints. Every sound matters more. Every movement carries weight. They realize too late that they are the ones reacting. This is the moment training reveals its limits. Their training assumed compliance from the environment after entry. It assumed the enemy would be degraded. It assumed superiority would compound automatically. Those assumptions worked in most cases. They are failing here. Stress spikes. Heart rates climb. Fine motor skills degrade. The fight compresses. Options narrow. The plan fragments as individuals adjust on the fly. What they are experiencing is not just resistance. It is competence. Competence that does not rely on the same inputs. Competence that was built for this exact moment. That realization carries psychological weight. It disrupts confidence more effectively than violence ever could. They see flashes of movement now as vision returns, but it does not help. Sight arrives too late to reassert control. The tempo is already set by someone else. The rhythm of the encounter no longer belongs to them. In that instant, they understand the real mistake. Not the device. Not the entry. Not the timing. The mistake was assuming blindness meant weakness. Assuming that without eyes, effectiveness collapses. Assuming that dominance comes from tools rather than from the person using them. That realization does not announce itself. It does not come as a clear thought. It comes as a feeling in the gut, a recognition that the situation is no longer predictable, that the person they tried to overwhelm is not overwhelmed at all, that the advantage they believed they held was never guaranteed. By the time that understanding fully forms, the window to correct it has already closed. Chaos feels powerful because it is loud and fast and unpredictable. It gives the impression of momentum, but chaos is fragile. It collapses under its own weight when it meets something stable. That is where muscle memory matters, not as a metaphor, but as a physical advantage. Muscle memory is not about memorizing movements. It is about reducing delay. It shortens the distance between perception and action. When stress floods the system, the brain becomes unreliable. Thought fragments. Attention jumps. What remains dependable is what has been practiced beyond conscious control. In high-pressure environments, speed does not come from rushing. It comes from removing hesitation. Every moment spent deciding is a moment lost. Muscle memory bypasses that bottleneck. The The body acts without waiting for permission from doubt. This is why people under stress often revert to old habits, even bad ones. The nervous system grabs what is deepest, not what is newest. Elite training exploits that tendency. It replaces weak habits with strong ones until the strong ones are the default. Under chaos, fine motor skills degrade first. Hands shake. Fingers lose precision. This is not a flaw. It is biology. Muscle memory accounts for that. Movements are designed to be gross, efficient, and repeatable. The goal is not elegance. It is reliability. Repetition under stress conditions teaches the body what works when the system is overloaded. Clean techniques in calm environments mean little if they cannot survive noise, pain, and confusion. Muscle memory is tested in those conditions repeatedly until it stops breaking. Chaos also distorts time. Moments feel stretched or compressed. People rush when they should slow down or freeze when they should move. Muscle memory stabilizes tempo. It provides rhythm when the environment has none. That rhythm keeps actions from stacking on top of each other in destructive ways. When chaos hits, untrained people try to control everything at once. They skin wildly. They overreact. They chase information. This creates more chaos. Muscle memory narrows focus. It limits options. It channels energy into a smaller set of actions that are known to work. This narrowing is not tunnel vision. It is prioritization. The body recognizes the most immediate problem and addresses it without debating alternatives. That efficiency creates space, both physical and mental. Muscle memory also builds consistency across individuals. When everyone responds the same way under pressure, coordination improves. Movements align. Expectations match reality. This reduces friction and prevents collisions, both literal and figurative. In contrast, chaos rewards improvisation only when improvisation is built on fundamentals. Random creativity under stress usually fails. Muscle memory provides the structure that makes adaptation possible. Without it, improvisation becomes guesswork. There is also a psychological component. Knowing that the body will respond correctly reduces cognitive load. The mind does not need to micromanage. That frees attention for awareness rather than control. Awareness is what prevents surprises. In environments where milliseconds matter, confidence is not about bravado. It is about trust in the process. Muscle memory earns that trust. It has proven itself in training again and again under increasingly hostile conditions. When chaos collides with muscle memory, chaos loses its advantage. It cannot force mistakes as easily. It cannot create the hesitation it relies on. The trained body absorbs disorder and converts it into motion. This is why experienced operators often appear slower but arrive sooner. Their movements are efficient. There is no wasted motion, no false starts, no corrections mid-action. Everything flows because it has flowed before. Muscle memory does not eliminate risk. It manages it. It turns uncertainty into manageable variables. It reduces the number of things that can go wrong at once. For the untrained, chaos feels like opportunity. For the trained, chaos is just another condition. Noise, darkness, pressure. These are inputs, not obstacles. When everything becomes unpredictable, the most predictable element wins. Not the loudest, not the fastest. The one that does not need to think before acting. The one whose body has already solved the problem long before it appears got it. If you want keynote number 6 expanded next, say the word, and I'll keep the same tone, structure, and constraints. The lesson was not learned in the moment the flashbang detonated. It was learned in the seconds after, when expectations failed to line up with reality. Tools worked. The plan worked. The environment behaved exactly as predicted. And still, the outcome shifted. That disconnect is what forces learning. They had relied on a familiar equation. Shock plus speed equals control. Remove sight, overwhelm the senses, and resistance collapses. That equation had held true often enough to feel universal. Universality creates comfort. Comfort creates assumptions. Those assumptions were exposed. Darkness did not create helplessness. Noise did not create paralysis. Disorientation did not stop action. Instead, it stripped away distractions and revealed something deeper underneath. Capability that did not depend on ideal conditions. Capability that had been built specifically for moments like this. The first lesson was about over-reliance on technology. Flashbangs, optics, night vision, communications. All powerful, all useful. None of them guarantees dominance. Tools shape environments, but they do not replace the human element. When the human on the other side is prepared to function without those tools, the advantage shrinks fast. The second lesson was about assumptions of hierarchy. They assumed control because they initiated the encounter. They assumed superiority because they dictated the terms of entry. But control is not granted by action alone. It must be maintained. When the opposing force refuses to conform to expectations, hierarchy becomes unstable. They also learned that training depth matters more than training breadth. Knowing many techniques means little if none of them survive stress. The opponent did not display complexity. There were no flashy movements. Just fundamentals executed cleanly under pressure. That simplicity was the advantage. Another lesson emerged around tempo. They believed speed belonged to the initiator. In reality, speed belonged to the person who did not hesitate. The moment doubt entered, tempo shifted. The fight began to move at a pace set by someone else. Once tempo is lost, regaining it is difficult. They learned that dominance is psychological before it is physical. The moment they realized blindness had not neutralized the threat, confidence fractured. Not completely, but enough. That fracture altered decision-making. It tightened movements. It shortened breaths. It narrowed perception in the wrong way. They also learned how quickly roles can reverse. The flashbang was supposed to create vulnerability. Instead, it revealed resilience. The person they expected to manage became the variable they had to manage around. That role reversal created pressure they had not planned for. Another lesson was about predictability. They had expected certain behaviors. Freezing, flinching, compliance. When those behaviors did not appear, they were forced into adaptation. Adaptation under pressure is possible, but it is slower than preparation. The opponent had already prepared. They learned that absence of sight does not equal absence of awareness. Awareness simply shifted channels. Sound, touch, movement, spatial memory. These inputs combined into a coherent picture that functioned just as effectively at close range. In some ways, more effectively, because it was not cluttered by visual chaos. They learned that panic is not always loud. Sometimes it is subtle. A slight delay, a second glance, a recalculated step. Those small signs compound quickly in confined spaces. They learned that confidence based on equipment is brittle. Confidence based on capability is resilient. When equipment fails or conditions change, only one of those survives. Most importantly, they learned that the real danger was not the darkness. It was underestimating the person operating within it. Underestimation creates blind spots that no device can fix. It narrows planning. It weakens contingencies. That lesson did not come as a formal debrief in the moment. It came as an internal recalibration, a recognition that something fundamental had been misunderstood, that the equation they trusted needed revision. Darkness was not the enemy. Noise was not the enemy. Even blindness was not the enemy. The enemy was the belief that removing comfort removes capability. That belief failed here. What they walked away with was not fear, but respect. Respect for training that goes beyond checklists. Respect for preparation that anticipates loss rather than avoiding it. Respect for the idea that true effectiveness shows itself when conditions are worst, not best. They learned that when everything goes wrong, the person who keeps moving with purpose holds the real advantage. Not because they can see, but because they do not need to.